my friends, welcome to What Culture Wrestling. My name is Simon Miller, and that's right, Impact had a big pay-per-view last night known as Hard to Kill 2022, and as I promised you, when Impact Wrestling does indeed have an event like this, we shall return to the airwaves and give the good bits an up and the bad bits a down. The reason I've sped through that is because everything happened in this show. Let's go. Couple of pre-show matches to talk about before we do get into the main crux of things here, because we did have Jake Something taking on Madman Fulton, and we had Mike Bailey taking on the Laredo Kid, taking on Chris Bay, taking on Ace Austin. Now both were good, especially the latter, but the reason I wanted to make sure I shone a little bit of a light on it here is because this was Speedball Mike Bailey finally making his way to Impact. And a couple of years ago, over here on a UK show, I found myself on the same wrestling card as Mr. Bailey, and afterwards, he went out of his way to give me some advice. Now, did he need to do this? No, he did not. Was he incredibly good with his feedback? Yes, he was, and I've never forgotten it. So given that I do have a small platform, I wanted to shout him out. I wanted to give him a salute and say, you damn right he's about to smash it in Impact, because he has made his way. Plus, he also won here, so this was happy days, and I was all like, woohoo! It made me feel all warm and fuzzy in my tum-tum, and if you take all of it, it is getting it up. We were then also making history as Hard to Kill started properly, because it was the first ever Women's Ultimate X match. And as usual, I think they got together beforehand and said, how about we try to kill each other? And everybody else went, that sounds great. So it was Tasha Shields taking on Chelsea Green, taking on Jordynne Grace, taking on Lady Frost, who remains being billed from somewhere cold, which is the best thing ever, taking on Alicia Edwards, taking on Rosemary. And what I really appreciate here is that as soon as the bell rang, they all tried to get the X. That's the whole point of the match, those are the rules, so why the hell would you waste any time doing a lockup? You also had plenty of shenanigans here, because at one point, Havoc got in the ring, because of course she's best friends with Rosemary and Decay, and she just had her on her shoulders going, grab the X, grab the X. Chelsea Green didn't like this, so she gave her a missile drop kick. But because I'm a pretty strange chap, it made me laugh. Everybody was then doing these crazy dives onto everybody else, and that's when I realized, oh man, we're gonna get to that nut stage, especially during this pay-per-view. And then we had people falling onto the floor and just folding up like accordions. You just know that every single person in this has woken up this morning like, oh, I can't move my back. I think Alicia Edwards eventually got sick of this, so she got a kendo stick and started to whack everyone with it. And then Lady Frost did this, I don't know, fall from as high up as she could possibly go. And that was like, well, that's it, Kansas. We ain't in Toto anymore. This is when we all went scrambling after that X again, and it looked like Chelsea Green was gonna grab it, but this is when Tasha still zoomed in. She was able to knock her off. She was able to grab the thing, and now she has secured herself a championship match at some point in the future. And sure, look, this wasn't the smoothest thing that you'll ever see, but I thought they'd put in a crazy amount of effort here, and they took some horrific bumps. And also, if you had a real fight where someone said, oh man, go grab that inanimate object, I don't think it actually would be that smooth, so I am giving it up. Mickie James was then being promoted, and she talked about the Royal Rumble, so there's that forbidden door being opened again, and we had the retort from Deonna Purrazzo, because they're going to have a match later, and I'll give you a little spoiler now. It is absolutely crazy. It's also led to our X Division match between Trade Miguel and Steve Macklin, and these guys have been feuding for ages, especially because Steve Macklin has been like, well, you may have beaten me in a match, Trey, but you've never actually pinned or submitted me specifically. And Trey was like, man, I'm so bored of this, so if I beat you tonight, you are never allowed to challenge for this title again, as long as it's around my waist. As we know, Steve Macklin is an ass, so he attacked Trey Miguel during his entrance, but it did not go well from him, because Miguel was like, oh yeah, you want to do that, do you? And he DDT'd him on the rampway. So seriously, Steve, next time you're gonna do a jump attack, you need a better plan than this. I kind of liked it though, because even when the bell rang, they still just wanted to try and rip each other's heads off, and within seconds they were back on the outside and they were jumping off barricades. This was basically just one massive war, and at one point I think Macklin went, oh man, Trade Miguel's back is hurt, so I'm gonna go after that, because what did we say just a few minutes ago? You need your back in order to survive. But the way Miguel got back into this is he went, well, earlier I did a DDT on the floor and that worked, so why don't I do it on an apron? And once again it worked. Instead though, Macklin was able to get back into a position where he basically hanged Trey Miguel off the ropes. And he did this move where I honestly thought Trey Miguel was dead. He just bended over into about 8.2 different positions, and that doesn't even make any sense. We then went back to wrestling tennis after this because Steve Macklin's head then went into Barry Barricade, and this is also when Miguel hit the Meteora, and because I'm a moron, I bit. I was like, well, that has to be the ending, but it wasn't. It only got a 2. As more wrestlers should do once their finisher fails though, Trey Miguel just did it again, and sure, he hit a couple of other maneuvers beforehand, but his whole MO was, I've got to get back to the Meteora, so he did do it for a second time, and lo and behold, can you believe it, he got the win, he retained his championship. Steve Macklin now has to step aside, and this is getting it up. Melissa Rain and Tenille Dashwood then cut a promo saying, oh, Inspiration, you're massively unprofessional, because of course they can't be here this evening due to COVID things, so I hope they're doing okay. This is where Ian Riccaboni here of Ring of Honor commentary fame joined the announce table, and we just have to take a little bit of a sidebar. Because this was doubly cool, as this was also the first night when the former Tom Phillips in WWE also took over commentator duties, and I mean no disrespect to Matt Striker, he did a fine job, but honestly, why did we ever fire Tom? He is so good at his job, and between him and Ian, they made this feel like a really important show. This also put into place that our next match was for the Ring of Honor title as Chris Sabin took on Jonathan Gresham, and all I'm gonna do is the clap and the applause like I'm some sort of a seal. We all know that Chris Sabin is great, but if you've never seen Jonathan Gresham before, and I have, but again, you'd have to go watch Ring of Honor, and we all know the story here, he is such a good, terrific grappler, it ain't even funny. There's also fought under pure rules, which made it feel really unique, and if you've never seen one of those matches before, there's just a bunch of rules in there like, well, you can only have a certain amount of rope breaks, or you can't punch someone directly in your face with a closed fist because that makes you an ass. So for all those folks that are all like, oh man, this new style of wrestling is too fast and I don't like it, well then you doubly should go and watch this, because it's all not slow, but kind of slow paced and technical. It's just so damn good to see. You also have a strict time limit, and when you took all of this and put it into a package, it did feel like Impact saying, well, some people may not have seen Ring of Honor, so we should showcase this as much as they can, and they did a terrific job. It also tied into the finish because it felt like maybe they were going to go for a draw, but then they started busting out all of these most devastating moves in all of sports entertainment, the surprise roll-up, but even I, the king of that saying, think that's kind of disparaging to say, because honestly, the one that Jonathan Gresham used to win this was like he was some kind of octopus. He absolutely wrapped the hell out of Chris Sabin. He retained his title. And look, I can't recap everything that happened here because it was too technical. It's the only word I can think of. It was too technical, but you must go see it. I think this all may be a really good jumping off point for Gresham as well, who is also coming to the UK soon to a promotion called Progress Wrestling, which you may have heard of. And word on the street is some bald a-hole is the new host of that. But who the hell knows who that is? Jonah was then finally ready to go toe-to-toe with Josh Alexander, and I'm not gonna lie. Two massive pieces of man meat clashing and doing a big hoss fight. I was so pumped, and they did not let me down. However, because Jonah is so much bigger than Josh Alexander, we kind of told the story here that Jonah is the big powerful guy, whereas Josh Alexander is the more submission, fast-paced guy. This meant in the early going, Jonah was trying to grab Josh, so he wasn't able to do it. But when he did, he murdered him. And now you're going, Simon, why are you laughing at murder? It's because I was so shocked, right? It's like when you go to a funeral, you shouldn't laugh, but then a little chuckle comes out, and then after that, you absolutely murked. So he was just throwing around Alexander for a while, so Josh panicked and went, well, I better pick this guy's ankle, because if he can't walk around, he can't do any moves to me. But on impact, the big man had also injured Josh Alexander's ribs, so he just went, well, I'm going to smack you in the midsection, which he did. Josh Alexander fell down. The ankle kept providing the get out of jail free card though, because he could always go after that. But they were laying lumps into each other so bad that they actually ended fighting in the crowd. And this is when Alexander lost his damn mind, because he went to the top rope and he just dove into this carnage. And I was like, well, one person, at least one person, has to have just broken their arm. They soon started headbutting each other, and surprise, surprise, there was blood, because that's what happens if you do try and headbutt another man. And this is when Impact surprised me, and surprised me in the best possible way. Because for ages, they've been going, Josh Alexander is the man. Josh Alexander is the dude. We love Josh Alexander. But given that he was fighting Jonah, someone with a name, and someone who has recently entered Impact Wrestling, I was like, okay, well, we'll give him the W, and then we'll give it back to Josh Alexander, because that's just what wrestling does. But we didn't do that, because Jonah went for a moonsault, he missed, so Alexander went back to the ankle. He also kicked Jonah right in the head so many times I thought he was going to knock it off. And he got the victory. And even though I was watching at home, I even did a little jig because I just did not see it coming. So this was utterly nuts, and clearly both guys had the MO of making their mark. And admittedly, most of their marks was on the other person's head. But this was also a terrific match. And this pay-per-view was pretty damn good. We then went from the sublime to the ridiculous because Impact tried to get as many people as possible into one wrestling ring. Because we had the Hardcore War, which is a name that always makes me laugh for some reason, and we had Heath, we had Rhino, we had Eddie Edwards, we had Rich Swann and Willie Mack taking on the Good Brothers and Violent by Design. And this is another one where the feud has just been going on for ages. The thing is, it had so many good wrestlers in it when it did begin. I was like, well, there was no way this can be bad, especially because it was essentially War Games, but without the extra rings and without the steel cage. And while that did mean, by the end, I was like, I don't know what's happening here, because way too much is happening in front of my eyes. It was just absolutely fun and entertaining, and it is getting it up. So because we did build to the 5-on-5 with people entering at intervals, we had Cody Deaner versus Rich Swann when Carl Anderson was the next guy. He ran in there with a golf club, which eventually set the scene. Willie Mack came out next with a literal axe handle, so if somebody in the future could come out with a literal clothesline, I would massively appreciate it. And the rest of the guys were soon out as well, and they had trash cans and they had chairs, although he came with powder and he just chucked it into somebody's eyes. So this was like the opposite of escalation. But once again, it made me laugh. I don't know why. I don't know why I laugh at wrestling, I just do. It did kind of underline why you are meant to have extra rings in a war game type like match, because it just got so out of control. And when all 10 dudes were in there, we did that thing when 5 looked at the other 5, they went, rah, and they just ran at each other. And honestly, by this point, it was already off the chart because everyone was being smacked with weapons and everybody was being thrown all around the place. But Eddie Edwards went, well, I've got a kendo stick, but a lot of people use kendo sticks. Why don't I set it on fire? And don't forget, that means he wanted to kill someone. That's the only reason you set something on fire, unless you're trying to burn a building down, but I didn't see any buildings around here. We then saw a pile driver through a table, Rich Swann doing a 450 onto the floor onto Eric Young, before that damn Willie Mack introduced a barbed wire board. No. It was Joe Doring who had the worst of this though, because he DDT'd Swann into it and I can never handle it. Look, it makes me glue my hands to my head. And thankfully, eventually, Rhino did gore the shit out of Carl Anderson and he got the 1, 2, 3. And you can say this was a win, but was it a win? Did anybody actually win here? And I've kind of zoomed past this because once again, if I try and recap it, the video is going to be about 3 hours long and halfway through it, I'm just going to fall down because I'll run out of air. But if you just like crazy, quote unquote, garbage wrestling matches, you have to go and watch this. It also gets a round of applause and it gets it up. Jay Impact then decided they hadn't had enough shenanigans because Mike Bennett and Matt Taven from Ring of Honor hit the ring, and then Vincent and PCO and Maria Kanellis was here, and this was very much set up like an invasion, especially because they then put their sword in the sand and said, we want a tag team title shot. To talk about Impact Wrestling just being everybody's best buddy. They don't care who you are. If you have 3 initials and you represent yourself as a wrestling company, they will say, come in, man, we'll have some fun with you. And I, as a fan especially, just love that, because who needs walls, man? We gotta break them all down. And ain't no one doing that better than Impact. And then the world title was on the line. This show was nuts. Because it was Matt Cardona versus W. Morrissey versus Moose, who is the champion. And they did that thing when you start off going really slow, but then eventually hit the wham button and speed things up like crazy. Kicked into gear when Cardona did a dive, but he got his ass powerbombed. And then it became you hit me, and then I'll hit you, and then we'll hit him, and then he can hit us. I mean, the visual representation would be what I'm doing with my fingers now. You just keep going round and round and round. I mean, Moose powerbombed Morrissey at one point, even though he was holding Matt Cardona, so I was like, what the flub is going on? And we also made sure that Chelsea Green got some revenge here, because of course her and Moose have fallen out in the past, so she just walked out and she gave him a splash. So Hard to Kill was basically a pay-per-view where somebody said, let's do everything, and it seemed like W. Morrissey was going to take the advantage here, but sadly he hit his taunt button too much, so that's when Matt Cardona came in and gave him the code breaker, but he hates Moose so much he found him and he pushed him through Alan the announce table, and that's when I paused. I had to pause, I laid down, I slept for 5 minutes, then I got back to it. A fan then threw his fake leg into the ring, so Morrissey was like, oh well, I may as well use this. And this is when the triple threat klaxon sounded, which we have never talked about, because it was just move, 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 move. And that sequence finished too with Cardona hitting the radio silence, but Moose breaking it up at the very last second. I mean, sheesh. A chair was then involved, which benefited Moose massively because he smacked everyone, especially W. Morrissey, essentially taking him out of the thing. And then, in short, just to be honest with you, everybody was being hit in the dick. Chelsea Green then got murked again because essentially Moose powerbombed Matt Cardona onto her, and he was probably so devastated by this, he walked right into the lights out spear. Moose pinned him to retain his championship, and these three have such good chemistry together. I don't want to be horrible, but I thought it'd be pretty good, but I didn't think it would be this good. They took my expectations and smashed them out the park, and it is getting it up. Wonderfully too, this did mean that Mickie James was defending her Knockouts Championship against Deonna Purrazzo in the main event, and you damn right, this was also a Texas death match. So if you hadn't had enough weapons, by this point Impact went, don't worry, we got you covered, bro. But seriously, it is getting it up. Ring of Honor's Roxy was watching from ringside, which again ties into everything that Impact is doing at the moment, and the absolute brutality here. Like, even when Deonna and Mickie locked up, it was like they were trying to rip the other person's heads off. They were not playing around. It also tied into the rules of the match because, of course, in a Texas death match, you can get a pin and you can get a submission, but then your opponent has to stay down for the 10. So even though Deonna was able to win early on by making Mickie James tap out to the Venus de Milo, Mickie was then able to get out at the 10 count. So it was like, sorry, Deonna, that actually counts for squash. We then had even more tables and chairs, and I do have to say that by this juncture, it was a little bit much for me. I know you're going, Simon, you absolute waste of space. Why couldn't you handle it? And it wasn't I couldn't handle it. It was like the other way. We had seen so much that I saw people getting attacked by a steel weapon. I was like, yeah, but I saw a fire stick earlier, so why am I going to care? I mean, they still found ways to make me go, oh, I didn't see that coming, including using a wheelbarrow. A wheelbarrow? I didn't see any gardening around here. Deonna then busted James open again by using a flight case, which also got another 3 count, but Mickie was able to get up before the count of 10. And then I knew it. I should have seen it coming after the damn wheelbarrow. It was thumbtacks. And you know how I feel about thumbtacks. It makes me all scared and wibbly wobbly deep down in my tum-tum. And the idea of this story too was the fact that Deonna Purrazzo could easily beat Mickie James, but she wasn't able to take advantage of the rules here because again, James kept getting up before the 10 count. And of course, throughout all of this, they were just bumping and flying into the tacks. And this was my face because it's thumbtacks, man. Of course it hurts. And then it seemed like James was actually going to get the victory because she whammed Deonna with a chair. But this is when Matthew Redholt, who of course is Piazzo's best friend, just came out here and he picked her up and propped her up as if this was Weekend at Bernie's. And if you can believe it, that counts. The finish did eventually come though when Deonna Purrazzo went into these pins and Mickie James hit her TDT to get the 1, 2, 3. But even before that, she had a guitar and she was going to smack that into Purrazzo, but Matty Boy got right in the way and he took the blow because he's essentially a best buddy. This is genuinely brilliant though, and even though Hard to Kill overall was a tremendous pay-per-view, if you're only going to pick one, pick this, because they grabbed the ball and they ran with it, and they're probably never going to slow down. As mentioned though, I do have to be an ass and throw it down in there because seriously, when we got to the end of this main event, I did have this overwhelming feeling of, well, that was just a little bit too much hardcore wrestling for me, because essentially every single match had something. So I was just weaponed out by the end of it. And also, what do you do next time? Does somebody come out with a gun? Does somebody get a sword and just go whoop and decapitate them? They raised the bar to crazy levels, which of course should be applauded. I ain't trying to take anything away from them. It was crazy, crazy effort, but just from a personal point of view, I thought we could have reeled it in just a little bit. So yeah, just a tiny bit of a down. But do not worry about that because Hard to Kill otherwise was flubbing great and far better than I thought it was going to be. So overall, it is getting it up. Now please do leave a comment below and let us know what you thought about last night's episode of Impact. Doesn't make sense. Hard to Kill. What did you think of Hard to Kill? Like the video, share the video and subscribe. Head on over to whatculture.com. Here I am on my horse where you can read some articles. Make sure you come follow us on social media. And we have a ton of other videos, including Battle of the Belts ups and downs, because I've watched way too much wrestling today and you can go watch that now. My name is Simon from What Culture. Thank you for joining me as always. You make sure you have a lovely day and I know I'll see you very soon.